So a couple of days ago, around lunchtime-ish, I put a public call on Facebook asking if anybody was available between 6 p.m. and about 1 a.m. On a Thursday night to take me to a psychiatric appointment. Naturally, nobody was really that available at short notice, and I had to reschedule my psychiatric appointment for the next day. I edited the post and I checked, is anybody available to take me on Friday? So a few things about this. First of all, I had actually previously organised transportation to this appointment, but naturally being a 7-hour time period, that kind of fell through, especially on a school night. The other thing is that it's 7 hours. I was somewhat restricted by who I could actually find that would be available in that time slot. On top of that, I wasn't particularly comfortable with asking just about anybody. Naturally, if I've gone in for a medical appointment and I have an episode or have any issues, whoever I'm there with needs to be able to speak for me and on my behalf. And so that's not something that I feel that I can just trust with just about anyone. Unfortunately, as things panned out, I was in a position where it was either I trust whoever I can get that is available, or I don't have this appointment, and it was kind of necessary that I get to this appointment as soon as possible. So I'd gotten a bit desperate, and I put a public call on Facebook asking, is anybody free for about 7 hours on a Thursday evening and then again on a Friday evening. As it turned out, someone was free. A girl that I met about 3 times beforehand gave me a buzz and said she is available, that she can take me, which was fantastic. I also managed to organise for one of my emergency carers to be available, not so much for the entire duration, but he could come for about maybe an hour or so. So if I had an episode or something, he could come, pick me up, take me home, make sure I got home safe, or if he couldn't do that, he could at least ensure that when I was in hospital, he could come pick me up once I had recovered from my episode. I also managed to coordinate with my mother in Australia, remembering that Australia is 10 hours ahead of Malta, so that she would be awake, so that if I did have an episode while I was seeing the doctor, the person I was with could then call my mother on my phone, and my mother could talk on my behalf. So that was the situation. I had 3 people organised, one to actually be with me the entire time, as long as it took, one to be able to respond in an emergency situation, and one who was able to talk on my behalf from a medical perspective. That's 3 people for this one appointment. I'd like you to keep all of that in mind as I continue the rest of this story. So we organised for me to get picked up at about 6 and go to the clinic. Now, I'm used to dealing with this particular clinic, with this particular psychiatrist. Essentially, what he likes to do is he likes to work on a first in, best dressed situation. So the first in is the first person he sees. But if he thinks that your appointment will probably take a bit longer, he'll work on a priority system of who can he see the quickest, and the longest patients he'll leave till later, so that he can give them more time. It's a reasonable system. Unfortunately, due to my circumstances, that often means that I end up seeing him last, which is why, on many occasions, I've been there at about 6 p.m. for an appointment at around 7:30, and I haven't left until 1 a.m. Now, on this particular appointment, I was there to get 2 medical reports. I was there to get one that would allow me to travel, that I could show to flight attendants, to staff at an airport, so that if I had an episode, the person I was traveling with could show it to them and show them. They could see that I'm not a flight risk, that there was no medication required, that I would come out of it in my own due time, although that could be many hours. And very importantly, even though I can walk, if I should be bound to a wheelchair at all times throughout the entire duration of the flight, from the moment I arrive at the airport all the way till I arrive at my destination. Every step of the way, every stopover, anytime I'm not in a chair, I should be in a wheelchair. The second document that I wanted from him was a complete medical report. Now, this complete medical report needed to say everything from what my diagnosis was, how it's being treated, why I'm having issues attending that treatment. It had to cover my case history, at least in small part. It had to cover his experience with my episodes, as well as what avenues of treatment I tried. And it also needed to discuss, in as much detail as possible, the impact of my episodes. And the impact of my episodes is quite poignant, because One of the reasons that I need this medical document is because I haven't been able to get treatment because of my episodes. Due to a relatively weird series of events, the treatment that I require, I've been informed that I cannot miss a session of it. In addition, it does have some side effects, especially if I miss sessions or whatever. But my episodes means that I'm both highly likely to miss sessions unless I have a full-time carer who's transporting me there, looking after me, and make sure that I get there even if I'm passed out the entire time. So I need to have a carer who can physically carry me and physically transport me from home to the hospital, get me to have the treatment while I'm still passed out, and then get me home afterwards. In addition, I need a full-time carer to look after me in the case of side effects and all of that sort of thing in regards to the treatment. Now, none of that is feasible. Now, I'll get to more details on that in a moment. However, the important thing is that I was there for 2 reports. I'd emailed him about those reports in advance. My mother and I had actually written a list of here are all the things that need to be covered in both the travel document and also the medical report. Here are the things that need to be mentioned. Here is all the information that we can provide that he should already know, but so that he had it directly in front of him. And we also supplied him with the previous travel document that I had from my GP in Australia and my previous full medical report. Now, both of these were from about 2017, so they're a little bit out of date. All the stuff in them still applies, but they're not the sort of thing that many airlines might accept as current. Or, in the case of the medical report, it's not necessarily something that fellow doctors or the government would consider sufficiently current. So we had done all of the legwork. We emailed it to him easily a week or so in advance. We'd sorted all of this out and supplied him with everything necessary. Now, most of the stuff he already had on record, but we wanted to be sure. So we emailed that stuff in advance, and when we went in, I actually had my phone ready with the emails presented so that if he needed it, here are the emails in the session. So the first 5 minutes of the meeting went more or less as you expect. He asked how I was going, he asked how uni was going, since I hadn't seen him in a little while, so we had a bit of a chat. He asked how many episodes I was having in a given week, to which on a good week it was maybe 2 or 3, but I'd had a few bad weeks, especially over Christmas, where I was having 6 episodes in a week. Now, each episode can last about 5 or so hours, so that's quite a bit of time and quite a bit of issues. We then turned the attention of the conversation towards the reports. This is where things start to go a little bit skewy. First of all, he didn't read the emails. He didn't read the previous reports. He didn't do any of that. He just asked me briefly, "What is it you're here for?" I answered and told him all the information is in the emails, and he just quickly wrote down a quick letter for travel. Now, I'm just going to read out to you as best as I can the letter that was written. "Dear colleague, this is to certify that the gentleman is fit to travel. He suffers from conversion disorder with episodes weekly. He needs to be contained in a safe, low-stimulation environment. It comes about spontaneously and without," I think he was trying to say warning, but there's a few words here that I just can't read, "and lasts for a few hours." That's it. Now, there's no mention of the wheelchair. There is incorrect information in there, which is it's not that it happens weekly, it happens almost daily. Like, I have an episode usually every 2 to 3 days. And in addition, conversion disorder is not the only disorder. It's conversion disorder, catatonia, and autism. Like, these are the 3. Now, fine, I'm happy to accept that for an airline, you just putting down one of them is perfectly fine. But in the end, it's fine. I've got my old letter, and with that letter and this letter, it should be perfectly fine. Then we get to the full medical report. So after he's written the letter, and I couldn't quite read it at the time, so I just kind of assumed that he'd written down everything that I needed, the conversation has turned to the full medical report. Now, I went in there knowing full well that there was a very high chance that I wouldn't get the medical report that evening. I was hoping that we would get it that evening, but I knew this guy well enough that I figured, yeah, it'll probably be next week or something like that. Hopefully he'll email it to me, but it probably won't happen overnight. So he's asked me, "When do you intend to leave?" As in, when am I leaving Malta to return to Australia? So when do I need this report by, essentially? To which my response was, well, I'm leaving in late March, but I need this report as soon as possible, because that needs to go to people in Australia. And his response to hearing that was, great, then you can come in next week and we can start the treatment again. Let's book you in for one session each week until April. Now, some of you may not see the problem in this. That's probably because I haven't fully explained to you the nature of the treatment or everything around it. So let me explain. Back in 2019, I started a treatment under this psychiatrist of TMS. Now, TMS is designed to focus on the dissociative disorder. It's not so much designed for catatonia or autism or anything like that. It's purely for the dissociative disorder factor. And it apparently has really good success rate. There's a lot of good that comes out of it. And I was seeing some results. It was actually having an effect on that part of my overall diagnosis. TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation. And what he had told me is that when I start it, I can't stop it. The course that they design must be carried out. I must attend every single session without exception, especially because of the side effect factor. There's generally not that much in the way of side effects, but because of how my dissociative disorder interacts with my catatonia, which interacts with my autism, just because of how those things interact with each other, the side effects aren't so much on the treatment side of things, but rather on how affecting only this part affects the other parts of my disability. Now, in order to deal with that, I need a full-time carer, and that is the first of many issues with the treatment, and that is, I simply do not have a full-time carer. Now, there's plenty of reasons for this. The biggest one, but certainly not the only one, is simply the financial side of things. A full-time carer, even a live-in one, costs more money than I receive in a year from my disability pension, so I simply cannot afford a carer, full stop. Even temporarily is way more than I can afford. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that I've managed to afford that somehow. The number of carers who can physically lift me, who can transport me, who can do all of the stuff that is required, it's relatively specialized. Not heavily specialized, but it's relatively specialized. And in 2 years of looking, we haven't really found somebody who can actually fulfill that role. Furthermore, the treatment itself is expensive. The original course that he wanted to put me on, like after we did the trial course to see how I responded and what effects it had or didn't have and so on and so forth, the course that he wanted to give me over the course of about 7 months would have cost €8,000. That is over half of my annual income. In fact, that's almost 2/3 of my annual income on its own. I literally couldn't afford the treatment. I couldn't afford it from a financial perspective. I couldn't afford it from a carer perspective. I couldn't afford it from a psychological perspective with all of the added stress. There was no circumstance under which I could actually afford to do this course. And all of this led to me actually stopping the treatment in very early 2020, prior to COVID. We realized that I simply couldn't maintain this. So it was a little bit of a kick in the teeth for him to turn around and say, oh great, you can just start the treatment again. No, I can't. However, that's not the real kicker, because the real kicker here is the entire point that I am getting these medical reports in the first place. So remember all of that stuff that I said about, here's this treatment, it did seem to be having some effect, but I need financial support and a carer support, which I simply don't have access to. Those things are all available in Australia. I have family in Australia. I've got my parents, I've got my sister. They are willing and able to act as full-time carers and can also speak on my behalf, medically speaking. In addition, the TMS treatment was actually invented in Australia. So if I'm going to get the best possible treatment, Australia is actually the best place for me to go. So the reason that I'm coming in for this report is so that I can access the best treatment possible, so that I can access this specific treatment, because I can't access it in Malta. And his response is to say, great, just start the treatment while you're here. Oh yes, I'll write the papers and sign all of the medical forms saying why you have to go to another country to get this treatment, but in order to get this form, I want you to come in and start the treatment that I'm signing these forms for in the first place for you to get somewhere else. Now, So apologies for the quick interruption. I actually had an episode while recording everything prior to now, so everything from here is probably going to be in a different mood, different attitude. So what did I say to all of that? Well, I said yes. I signed up to continue the treatment. Now, I did that because I didn't really have much of a choice. I couldn't afford to fight him in that moment. My episodes are caused by stress, and let's face it, I'm pretty sure that would have been a relatively stressful situation for most people. And let me tell you something. When you've had GPs previously decide to stop being your doctor on the basis of you failing to turn up to appointments, you learn pretty quickly to just do whatever needs to be done to get them to sign the piece of paper, because you can't guarantee that they will do anything else. And in this case, it started attending medical treatment that I can't afford, can't deal with the side effects thereof, and can't even reliably attend in order to get the piece of paper that says that I can't reliably attend these appointments and that I can't afford them and so on and so forth. I have to work with my doctor, but my doctor does not have to work with me. So that was basically my Friday night. I now have this other appointment for which I've had to organise 3 people all over again, and it's not the same people because they're not all available. It's extra stress that I can't afford, it's an extra financial burden I can't afford. It's not easy to deal with this sort of situation, and yet this is the situation my psychiatrist is pushing me in. There are some upsides to this story, namely I'm going to get this piece of paper and hopefully some things that may or may not come to be when I update this story. But I really, really want to close on a single important point. Online payments are a thing. This entire scenario could have been dealt with via email. Thank you for listening.